You know how the Easter Bunny was saying that this is the most experimental thing that I've ever done? Well, he wasn't joking, and it's actually so experimental that it doesn't even work. Pretty cool, huh? But that's all I got for today, guys, so thank you all very much for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye. So I was just gonna make this video and call it biggest fail of all time and just explain to you why it doesn't work and that I'm sorry and just never talk about it again. But I know I can get it to work. I'm just gonna need a little more time to mess around with it. So instead of just ditching the idea entirely, I'm just gonna make this part one of a series of builds. For right now, I'm going to show you how I made it up until this point. I'm gonna show you why it's so unique and experimental. And in turn, I'm gonna show you what went wrong with it. So the reason why this thing is so experimental is because there are two things about it that I have never tried before that I'm trying in this thing both at the same time. Typically when I do experimental stuff, it's with two separate weapons, but I went for it. Didn't work out the very first time, but I'm gonna get it to work, I promise. First experimental thing about it is that it has cams, but they're stationary. They're not on limbs. They don't themselves move, they just rotate. And the way that they get their tension is I have the string attached to this clamp right here. It runs under this pulley, runs over here, around this pulley right here, and then to the smaller wheel on the cam on the underside. When you draw the string back, you can see the clamps go inwards, but the first mistake that I made was making the cams too small. So when you reach about this point, the smaller wheel on the cam has already been wrapped around one time entirely, and they're not made to have the string stack up on it. So that's definitely a problem, that you can only draw it back halfway. But as you can see, it's a really smooth system, so if I can fix the size of the cams, that should fix that problem. Then the third experimental thing is the lock and trigger mechanism. I've never seen somebody do something like this, because I made it out of a bar clamp. For those of you who don't know, this is a bar clamp. You use it to, you know, clamp stuff. And once it's clamped shut, it won't open back up until you push this little thing in, and then it can slide open. So what I've done is turn the bar clamp into the cocking and trigger mechanism, which, now that I think about it, is actually 4 experimental things that I've done. As you can see, it's almost entirely intact as a bar clamp. The bar runs all the way down the center of the crossbow or spear gun or whatever you want to call it. But the modifications that I've made is I have turned the release into a trigger. See how that lifts the arrow off of these 2 pegs? And this is pretty sweet. The way you're going to be able to cock it once it's finished is you engage the trigger with your pointer finger and you slide the entire trigger mechanism up to the front. You hook it around the rods with your 2 fingers, then you draw the whole mechanism back to the bottom. And of course I can only draw it back halfway right now, but once it's finished, you'll be able to draw it all the way to the back, so the trigger will be right here. So I'm pretty positive that this is not what any of you guys were expecting. You were probably, for whatever reason, expecting a full build. I'm sorry I can't really bring you that right now. I just gotta give you guys whatever I have at the moment, but I promise you guys, I'm not just trying to rip you guys off. I'm gonna do everything that I can to make this thing work. This is just all I got right now. So I hope you guys enjoy the build up until this point. Hopefully this just gets you even more excited for when it's actually finished. So the cams were super simple. I just drew out my design on some 12mm plywood, and then I cut it out on the scroll saw, and then I brought it over to the little Dremel router and I put the track on the edge. And the cool thing about that part was that I forgot to tighten the bit in there, so it drifted upwards and ruined the piece, and I had to redo it. That was pretty cool. Then I used some regular wood glue to glue the little wheels to the big wheels, and then I just planted some screws through it to really strengthen it. Alright, now a full 1/2-inch hole right in the center. And when I'm using these spade bits, I like to drill through partially until this little spike comes out of here, and then I go from the other side and then go through there. It just helps so that it doesn't splinter on this side. Now another hole here, and here. And then I put some more screws into these holes. Now, these screws, these round ones, are actually going to be the ones that I loop the paracord around so that it can go around the track and to the other cam. Now I'm going to use my angle grinder to cut a little piece off of this 1/2-inch pipe that'll fit perfectly into that hole in the cam. I am going to mix up the epoxy. What the heck? Oh, cool. The epoxy is frozen. I guess I gotta bring this inside the house and wait for it to thaw. Alright, take 2. So while those are drying, I'm gonna get to work on the bar clamp. Now I've got to do some welding on this part right here, but there's springs inside this mechanism, and if you heat up a spring, it stops being a spring and starts being a summer, if you know what I'm saying. So I'm gonna use my angle grinder to cut off this little rivet right here that holds the whole mechanism on the bar so that I can take this part off and disassemble it and I could weld it safely. Now hopefully this 2-minute varnish remover will be able to get this industrial grade enamel off of this thing. This is some tough stuff. Brush it on. Oh wow, it's already turning red. It's coming off pretty good already. Wow, this is some good stuff.
Yeah, these are definitely a buy.
So I was struggling to get the red out of there, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized I kind of want to keep it. This little red accent with this cast iron look, to me honestly looks exactly like something you'd find in Fallout, so this is getting me pretty hyped. Alright, now using this grid paper and this still put together bar clamp that I have, I'm taking careful measurements about all the angles of all the stuff that I'm going to be welding together. So my first things that I'm going to be welding are this piece of steel up here and this one up here, and I'm going to be welding them to this front little piece that was this on the other one, and this will be our trigger mechanism. And then after that, I'm also going to be welding the trigger guard onto it. Now to get the steel all posed up and ready for welding, I'm just using these little ceramic magnets. The heat from the welding is most likely going to completely ruin the magnets, but 8 of these were $2 at Home Depot. It's not a big deal. And since I can't really clamp the ground onto the pieces of steel, I just used 2 more magnets, bigger ones underneath this clamp, and I'm just making contact. But if you had a big piece of steel that you could put all this stuff on top of, then you would just be able to put the clamp on that piece of steel. So here's the new trigger piece. Now I'm going to weld on the trigger guard. I'm also going to be welding these rods to the back of the mechanism right here. This is what the string is going to go around. Alright, now I'm going to reassemble this. Now I'm going to take that old handle that I took out of here, put a 3/8 inch washer on it, put another piece of that tubing over this thing. Now I'll screw this in. Alright, now I'm going to be welding a couple of angle irons to the end of the clamp. Then after I did the welding, I clamped down the angle iron onto another piece of grid paper, and I'm drawing out the wings that I'm going to be mounting the cams onto. So now I clamp the bar and the angle irons down onto the 12mm plywood wings, and then I'm going to take this really thin 3mm plywood and I'm going to glue it on top of the wings right here so that we'll then have a flat surface. Now I'm going to be putting glue here, and I'm going to be gluing these top plates on top of the angle iron, but not actually gluing them to the angle iron. Alright, once the glue is dry, I also put a few screws in here just to really make this thing solid. Now at this point, I should be able to just pull it off like that. And now I can bring this over to the belt sander and level out these edges. Now I'm going to drill some 1/2 inch holes into the ends of the wings and give it the same treatment as the cams, where I epoxy the steel tubes into it. Now I cut some of these little shapes out of some smaller angle iron, and I'm going to be welding them right here. Alright, I drilled a couple of holes right here, and then I've got these ball bearing rollers. These are, I think, used in sliding doors or something like that, but we are going to use some screws and fix them into the wings right here. Alright, so I've taken some measurements for the first time. I've got this paracord right here. I just loop it around here. I'm not going to go around the second one. I'm just putting it with my finger right in the middle of where it would be if it were undrawn. And then to measure the draw length of it, I just draw it all the way to the end, and it lands right here. So I just make my mark right here, and now I'm going to shorten the bar to the mark that I made right here by cutting this rivet, cutting the bar right about here, and then sliding this little red piece up here, and then making my own rivet through it. Alright, now this is hardened steel. Now that I think about it, I don't really want to pop any rivets in it because that would mean that I would have to drill through it and that would take forever. So I'm going to do the same method that I did for the rivets in the Night Terror, where instead of drilling through it and popping a rivet, I'm just going to fill this right here with weld. And I'm also going to weld on the back here too. Now next is the stock. What I'm going to do is take this 3.5-inch piece of steel, I'm going to weld it onto the bottom right here, and then I'm going to carve the full stock out of some plywood and leave a little slit in it so that I can slide it over this piece of steel and put some rivets through it to fix it on. Alright, now I got these two 12mm brackets and then this one 3mm bracket. What I'm going to do with this one is put it right underneath this piece of steel, and I'm going to trace out the piece of steel onto it and then cut that out. I'm going to spread some glue, and I'm going to sandwich the thinner part in between these two wider parts. Alright, we're now going to shape the stock on the belt sander. And I'll finish up the shaping by hand with some sandpaper. Alright, the stock itself looks pretty good, I think, except now that I've got it on here, the angle on it is definitely way too sharp, and it's also a little too long for me, so instead of just redoing the whole thing, I'm just gonna cut a little Illuminati out of it and just sort of bend it. Alright, I chopped this out. Now I'm going to glue these two pieces together like this. Now while that's drying, I'm gonna get to work on preparing the pulleys for the tension mechanism. Now off the shelf, these things are rated for like 30 pounds or something like that. I can tell it's because the pin in them is hollow for whatever reason, so I'm gonna have to drill the pin out and make my own, probably out of a nail. And then I'm gonna cut this spinny thing off of it and then drill a 1/4-inch hole into here so that I'll be able to use a rivet to mount the pulley into the bottom of the clamp. Alright, now back to the stock. I'm going to clean up this edge right here where I glued it all together. Alright, to strengthen this bond, I drilled in all the way through the gap and I used some epoxy to plant a 20D nail into it, so this should be pretty sturdy. I'm going to drill through this a few times, then I'm going to pull this off, spread some epoxy on there, slide it back on, let the epoxy set, then I'm going to take some more nails and do some rivets through those holes. Alright, so I've done two new things. I cut this little piece out of some more plywood and I welded this bracket onto the back part near the stock, and this is where this will go. But before I can attach this, I'm finally going to attach the clamp and the pulley, which will provide the tension for the crossbow. So with a little gentle persuasion, we can make it so that this little protrusion thing actually fits perfectly into the hole on the clamp. I'm gonna chop this part off because I don't like getting pinched that much. And make my mark. I clamp the two brackets together and drill the hole. Put a rivet through the plywood, the bottom of the clamp, and the bottom of the pulley, and pop it. Then I drill a hole in the back part and pop a rivet in there too. Drill into here. Plant these screws up here too. And there's one finished limb, so now do the same thing on the other side. So that's all that's really even worth me showing you guys at this point. We all just gotta do what we do best. I'm gonna keep on making videos. You guys please just keep on giving me patience. You know I appreciate it very, very much. Again, sorry, this is most likely not what you guys were expecting, but as you can see, it's gonna be freaking awesome once it's finished, and I really, really do hope that you guys are excited to see it finished. I hope you guys had an awesome new year. I know a lot of you had a really great Christmas, but that's all I got for today, guys, so thank you all very much for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Nee, ist mir noch nicht für immer.